Someone tried to break into my house at 3 a.m. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, my heart pounding as if someone were punching it from the inside. I was in my small apartment in a relatively quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago, one of those old buildings with thin walls where you can hear every move your neighbors make, but this time, the sound was completely different. It was a faint, muffled creaking sound coming from the main entrance door. It was as if someone were trying hard to turn the key or messing with the lock very quietly, with an expertise that suggested experience. I sat up in bed, terrified, watching the door, my eyes wide in the darkness, listening to the sound of scratching on the door from the outside. It was about 3:30 a.m., and the apartment was a bit cold because I leave the window partially open in the summer. I heard another sound like a slight metallic friction, then everything stopped for a few seconds, then the sound returned, slower this time, as if the person were trying to ensure that no one heard him. I had been living alone for 6 months since my breakup with my ex-girlfriend, and I wasn't expecting any visits, especially at this time. I got up quietly, my feet bare on the cold wooden floor, and walked with hesitant steps toward the door. I grabbed my phone, the battery was low. I thought about calling the police immediately, but what if it was just a drunk neighbor who got the wrong door? Or maybe stray cats were making the noise. But the sound was very precise and human. I stood behind the door, my breath held and my ear pressed against the wood. I heard a faint sigh from the outside, then a sound like a whisper, as if someone were talking to himself. I heard him say, "Quiet, quiet." The words were muffled, yet enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. I realized this was no mistake. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was completely dark, and I saw nothing but vague shadows. My memories drifted back to stories I'd heard on Reddit about suburban burglaries and thieves targeting single-occupancy apartments, waiting until the residents were asleep. I work a routine office job, barely pay the rent, and didn't have any valuables. I asked myself, why would they target my apartment? I started trembling from the fear that was creeping into my bones. I went back to the bedroom with quick steps, grabbed the small kitchen knife I used to chop vegetables, and held it tightly. The phone in my left hand, I tried to open the emergency app. The sound returned again, stronger this time. It was as if the lock were actually moving. I imagined a hand wearing a thin glove. Many questions spun in my head. How long would it take before he succeeded? Minutes or seconds? I sat on the edge of the bed thinking about escape options. The apartment is on the second floor. The kitchen window overlooks a narrow alley, but jumping might result in a broken leg. I heard light footsteps outside the door, then dead silence. The fear made me hear my heartbeat in my ears, and every muscle in my body was tense. Why me? And why tonight? I was thinking about all the small mistakes I had made, like leaving the entrance lamp off, or not installing a security camera as my friend had advised me. The minutes passed with agonizing slowness, and every second carried the possibility that the door would suddenly burst open. After minutes that felt like hours, I decided to call the police. I dialed the number with trembling fingers, and whispered into the phone while hiding in the bathroom. The door closed behind me. I told the police officer in a shaking voice, "Someone is trying to enter my apartment." I gave him the address accurately, West Oak Street in the suburbs, and the apartment number. He said they would send a patrol within minutes, but in our area, the response was sometimes slow, especially in the early hours of the morning. I hung up the phone and went back to listening. The sound outside the door stopped suddenly, as if the person had heard me. Then I heard a very light knock on the door, 3 consecutive knocks, as if he were testing if anyone was there. I didn't respond. I started thinking about the worst. Maybe it's not a random thief, but someone who knows me. Was my ex-boyfriend trying to scare me? I don't think so, because he lives in another state. Or is it one of the strange neighbors I sometimes see looking at me in a weird way? I heard a sound like friction against the frame, then another faint creak. He was trying to use another tool, perhaps a scalpel or something, to lift the lock. I stepped out of the bathroom cautiously, holding the knife, and decided to stand behind the sofa in the living room, where I could see the door. The darkness was thick, with only a faint light from the street lamp creeping in through the curtains. Suddenly, the outside lights went out completely. My heart stopped for a moment. I heard the door shake slightly. Shouted out loud, trying to sound strong, and said, "Who's there?" But my voice came out trembling. I heard no response, just a terrible silence followed by light footsteps moving away slightly and then returning. I imagined the man outside, perhaps masked, wearing dark clothes, carrying a tool bag. In America, we hear about these incidents daily, thieves entering and robbing or harming the residents. I remembered a story I read about a woman in California who was killed in her apartment after the lock failed to keep the attacker out. Time passed, and the police still hadn't arrived. I began to sweat despite the cold, my hands clammy on the knife handle. I heard a new sound. It was an attempt to pry the door from the bottom. The wood was groaning under the pressure. I approached the door again and looked through the peephole. This time I saw a shadow moving quickly and then disappearing. There was definitely someone there. I started praying in silence, thinking about my family and how the news of my death would be a shock to them. The next few minutes were the worst nightmare. Scratching sounds, muffled sighs, and the feeling that time was running out. I imagined his hand entering through a small gap, then his whole body. Finally, I heard the sound of police sirens in the street, blue and red lights shimmering through the curtains. I sighed with relief for a moment and screamed at the top of my lungs, "I'm here. Apartment 2B. He's here," as I ran toward the door to try and secure it more. But in those very seconds, the thief clearly heard the sound of the police from the hallway. Instead of running away, he decided to end it quickly. Perhaps he knew the building well, or perhaps he was desperate. I heard a sharp breaking sound, the security chain snapped, and the door flew open violently. The man entered like a beast. He was tall and strong, wearing a black mask covering his face except for his eyes. I don't think he was looking to rob. He wanted revenge or control. He attacked me immediately and struck me on the head with the handle of a metal tool. I fell to the floor, and then he kicked me in the stomach. I tried to stab him with the knife, but I missed in the dark. I heard the officers rushing up the stairs, shouting, "Police! Don't move," but he had already broken in. In a crazed moment, he lunged toward the living room window, which was partially open, tore through the curtain, and exited into the narrow back alley, the alley leading to the iron fire escape. He was terrifyingly fast. When the officers reached the apartment seconds later, he had disappeared into the darkness behind the building. I felt my blood flowing down my face. I woke up in the hospital hours later with a fractured shoulder and a concussion. The investigation stated that he didn't steal anything, and the street cameras didn't catch him clearly. The neighbors heard the noise but were afraid to intervene. I now live in a different place, I change my locks every month, and I sleep with a light on and a handgun by the bed, after getting a legal permit.